Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I see that people are still coming in, but want to be very aware of the time, and I know we have a lot of information to share, but thank you for joining us today for optimizing Google ad grants for your nonprofit. Looking forward to speaking with everyone today. We're going to talk about maximizing Google ad grants. Feel free to ask questions as you think of them in the Q&A chat. Any questions you have at all, we'll be happy to answer those along the way or at the end. Don't hesitate. As you're thinking of questions, feel free to share those. And all right, Eric, you want to go to the next slide? Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling in from. I'm Mark Becker, the founding partner of Cathexis Partners, and with us today is Eric Werner. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Eric.
Yeah, I am a search marketing and interactive marketing expert. I've been doing this since 2005. I worked with my first Google grant in 2007. So I was kind of thrown into it right away, and that was for saving the polar bears SOS with the Natural Resource Defense Council. So I've been doing this for quite some time, and I've probably managed maybe 50 or 60 Google grants. I did this for an agency that I worked with in Atlanta. Then several years after that, I joined the Home Depot and managed a team of search marketers at the Home Depot. And then after that, decided that I was really interested in turning my attention full-time to focusing on nonprofits. And our big goal is to make the tools and techniques used by the Fortune 500 affordable and accessible to the nonprofit world so that you can get more donors and build your email list and make sure that your mission gets the attention you deserve.
Awesome. So yeah, he's going to be providing a lot of great information today. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide and just cover what we're going to do. A quick introduction to Google Ad Grants. Many of you are already probably using Google Ad Grants. Some of you on the line today might be just looking into it. So we're going to cover that a little bit, and then how to make the most out of your Google Ad Grant. That's going to be all Eric getting into that, and then share a real-world example of a project we recently worked on together, and then any additional Q&As. But again, as you have questions, don't hesitate to shout and share those. Everybody's on mute besides myself and Eric, obviously, but feel free to chat in your questions or feedback or thoughts along the way, and we'll be happy to share those with the team. So yeah, Eric, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll jump right in.
All right, excellent. Yeah, and one thing that I was going to add regarding the Q&A was that I do believe that we're going to be able to choose from one of the people that asks a question and be able to provide a free competitor landscape for that person. Competitor landscape that we're actually going to discuss some of the ideas in this presentation about how that can be useful for you, but specifically could be useful for you in terms of helping to build out your content strategy, helping to build out your Google grant, and kind of maximize the amount of traffic and donors that you can get from that. So please do ask questions. It's very helpful for us and greatly appreciated.
Yeah, that's awesome. So just quickly, yeah, the Google grant, $10,000 per month for in-kind Google Ads advertising for nonprofits. There is eligibility requirements, rules, and restrictions. There's a lot of details in that. We're not going to cover that so much today. We do have another document, though, that covers all that. You can see that at cathexispartners.com/resources. You can download that free guide that goes into more of the requirements. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of details and specifications that we don't need to bore everyone with today, but that is documented well online through Google's support, but also through our document that we put together. Today, we really want to focus on the details of the ad grants, and I don't know, it's kind of like how I also described Salesforce and how they give away 10 licenses. Google Ads is kind of similar to that, where it's free like a puppy, right? You really have to take care of it, and that is what Eric is here to talk about. So there, I've teed it up for you, Eric. Feel free to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you. So the approach we're going to take to learning about Google Grants today, I'm assuming that we're probably, there's probably going to be a certain type of person that's interested in, okay, when we're managing the Google Grant, what do we actually do when we log into the interface, when we're creating ads, when we're finding the keywords to target, when we're managing bids. And that's very valid perspective on what's important about a Google Grant. What we're going to focus on today is how to get the most from your Google Grant and how it can affect all the different areas of your digital marketing. So we know that kind of at the core, the Google Grant can help you to get more donations. It can help you to get more awareness to your site and to your mission. It can help you to build out your email list and also help you to build out your retargeting pool so that you're able to advertise to more potential constituents, more potential donors that have visited your site already as a result of the Google Grant. And today we're really going to look at what are the other areas of your marketing that can be improved by effectively implementing the Google Grant. So at a glance, these are some of the things that we'll talk about today. We'll talk about how the Google Grant and managing the Google Grant effectively can improve your targeting for your marketing efforts. We'll talk about, and I already hinted at this, that there's a big impact that managing a Google Grant well can have on your content strategy. And as I mentioned, we will choose somebody who asked a question for us to provide some free content strategy support, and we'd really appreciate any questions. Another thing that we can do with the Google Grant is that we can use it to co-optimize, meaning specifically to support other channels with the data that we can bring in from the Google Grant. And the example that we're going to share today is going to be specific to co-optimizing for organic search with the data and what we learn from the Google Grant. Another thing that we're going to talk about is messaging and calls to action, and how you get to test the calls to action and test your messaging with the Google Grant in a way that can then be applied to all other areas of your marketing. We'll talk about site optimization, of course, improving your email list, how collecting data from the Google Grant can help you to redesign your website more effectively, and then also managing the Google Grant well requires that you have effective web analytics tracking in place. So this, in some cases, we've seen organizations that get pushed to have better analytics and better data quality in order to effectively implement the Google Grant. But then as a result, that data quality then applies across all of their other efforts. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about page speed and creating great landing pages for your Google Grant as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move into one of the first examples of what we'll do. Now, we know that the Google Grant is a Google Ads grant, which allows you to target people who are searching in Google for keywords that are relevant to your mission. So one great way to find these keywords is to look at all the sites that are competing for the same audience. And so what we'll do is, we have this example where we have taken 4 competitors and we've found all of the keywords that they rank for in Google search, or all the keywords that they are targeting in their paid search. And what we're looking for here is we're looking for examples where there are 4 or more competitors that all rank for this keyword. They all have visibility associated with this keyword, but your site does not. And in many cases, there will be instances where your site doesn't even have a page about that keyword. So this is very interesting because this gives you an opportunity, because you can't target foster animals, for example, in your Google grant unless you have a page about foster animals to send people to. So in this way, we're able to find some great content gaps, some great opportunities to create content such that you can send people from the Google grant to your site associated with those topics. The idea that we're working with here is that if 3 or 4 or more of your competitors are currently ranking for those keywords, that they're probably pretty important. So what we do when we do an approach like this is that we'll ask you to then select items that are specifically seen as valuable to your organization. And it may be that all of these are valuable to your organization, or it may be that 2 or 3 of these are very, very important for you. And then that becomes the focus, and that gives you the opportunity to create content about these, create pages for people who are asking questions like how to get cats and dogs to get along, or whatever it is that's most relevant to your mission. Now I'm going to show you
a couple things. There's a question here, Eric. Sorry to interrupt, but there was a question if you have a moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
The question was, how do you find out what keywords your competitors are ranking for within Google?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are competitive research tools that you can use to do this. And one example of a tool, one of them is called SEMrush, and another one is called SpyFu. And yeah, so those are 2 tools. Now they're paid tools, so you have to pay a monthly fee to be able to access it. But it's a pretty reasonable price, and it's very effective to be able to get that data. But the thing that we found is that very often there is a level of effort associated with using those tools. And this is why what we'll do is we'll put together that data into a deliverable like this, such that you can see at a glance what your competitors are ranking for, what your site is ranking for, and more importantly, what your site is not ranking for, or what your site has no content for at all. Yeah, so thank you very much for that question. But yes, so there are competitive research tools. 2 examples are SEMrush and SpyFu.
Awesome, thank you.
Very good. Yeah, thank you. So moving on from there, we'll also look at the competitive landscape in general. So this is very interesting because many organizations come to us with a Google grant and they find that they're not able to spend the full $10,000 a month in the Google grant, especially since about 2 years ago, Google made some changes to the program. And when they made changes to the program, it became quite a bit more difficult to spend all the money. It used to be very simple because you could target one-word keywords and spend the money very quickly. Now, what they're doing is they're pushing you to make sure that you're targeting a very specific audience. And it's actually a good thing, even though it's more challenging and it requires more ongoing management effort. It's actually a good thing because they're pushing you to make sure that your ads that you're showing in your Google grant are as relevant as possible to the audience. But I want to show you the way that we use this competitive landscape, because we see if we have your site that we see is currently not using the full $10,000 per month, perhaps you're only using about $6,000 per month. I think that the natural question to ask is, well, is it possible for our niche, for our subject matter to be able to spend the full $10,000? And there are some circumstances where it can be really essentially, it can be really impossible to spend the full $10,000, especially if you have a mission and your organization is focused on a local geographic area. Sometimes that'll be an example of a situation where there just won't be enough people in the Denver area that are searching for this topic such that you can fully utilize the Google grant. And sometimes there's subject matter. I had an organization that I was working with that they were all about providing books to children that couldn't afford their books for school. And this is, certainly a very noble and very important cause. And there just weren't enough people searching for that specific concept for us to be able to spend the full $10,000 per month. So what's effective about this competitive landscape is that we're able to see, is there another organization that is able to spend the full $10,000? So in this case, if we're spending $6,000, we find that, okay, well, there is another competitor in this space that's able to spend the full $10,000. And in that way, we know that we can fill that gap. Now, specifically, what we would look at is the number of keywords that are being targeted in the Google grant. So in this case, in this example, this site has 50 keywords that they're targeting, whereas the site that's spending their full grant or very nearly their full grant has 113 keywords that they're targeting. So that shows you the gap that needs to be filled there, and that's exactly the situation where you could go back and look at that list of the keywords that your competitors are targeting, figure out, are there 50 keyword topics for which we don't have a page, that we could create a page such that we could point traffic from the Google grant to those pages. Now, keeping with our theme of addressing the way that this kind of information can also improve other areas of your site and other areas of your marketing, while we're in here looking at this, we might as well look at organic search as well. And we can see the difference in organic search traffic between your site and one of the major competitors, the number of keywords that they're ranking for in organic search in comparison to your site. And in that way, we can find out, well, where is an opportunity to take the data that we learned from the Google grant and apply it to our organic search as well.
Hey, Eric, quick question here from the gallery again. Is this information, how do you get this information? Is this also through those same tools, or by working obviously with a consultant like yourself, but is this the information that anybody could get themselves if they were to use these other tools, or what's that look like?
That's an excellent question. And yes, this is the kind of information that is in those tools. Now, what we actually do to produce this type of deliverable is we use the APIs from those tools. So that the programs that we've created will pull in data from those APIs to put together a deliverable like this in a very efficient manner. Whereas if you buy those tools and you pay the monthly fee for them, you can go in there and click around and download the information, and it can be very effective. And this is a big shortcut for us to be able to use the API and essentially automate the process of pulling all this information in for you so that you can use it to apply to your marketing efforts. Now, those same tools that we're talking about, they also provide other kinds of information. Like you can actually see, while you're looking at the competitive landscape, you can look to see, well, what are the display ads that the competitors are using? Now, you can't run display ads in your Google grant, but you can look to see, what is it that what are the display ads that the competitors are running? What sites are they running them against? You can see things like, what is it that their audience is showing interest in, and demographic information, and then also what devices are they showing these ads across? And while you're doing that, you can start to see certain opportunities. So one example of an opportunity that stands out to me for this is that you could look to see which publishers they're showing their ads across the most. And when I find a publisher that they're using that is really relevant to my mission, I would make a note of that such that we could do outreach to those sites, suggesting, potentially suggesting a, perhaps a guest blog post or some other type of collaboration in social media, or potentially even, one thing that's interesting that you could do is you could offer to them, hey, you could do a guest post on my site, and we could actually point traffic from the Google grant to that guest post, such that you're getting access to a larger audience, we're getting access to a larger audience, and we can both benefit from that partnership. So I think that's a good example of additional efficiencies and opportunities that come out of using the Google grant effectively and the type of work associated with it. So another example of something that we do very early on as we're trying to figure out how to use the full $10,000 per month, we need to find keywords that are really relevant to your mission, and keywords for which Google has already decided your site is an authority. So in this case, what we're looking at is the lost rankings. And very often this will happen in the context of a site redesign. And we'll see this over and over again with sites that come to us that redesign their site without having anybody that's really paying close attention to search marketing. And in this case, this is for AmeriCares, and they lost nearly, more than half, certainly more than half of their top, page one rankings. And we can also show the value associated with the traffic that was lost. So it was really a huge decline in their rankings. And the opportunity for this, when you have a Google grant, is that you can look to see what keywords you've lost rankings for. And when you find those keywords, those specific keywords that you've lost ranking for, you know that those are going to be a good target for the Google grant. And part of the reason that it's a good target for the Google grant is that Google has already indicated in the past that your site is authoritative and relevant to those topics. And what that means for the Google grant is that you're going to have a high quality score for those particular keywords. And it's a very strong near-term opportunity to find those keywords that you ranked for in organic search in the past and to target those with your Google grant. And then naturally, when you find those keywords that you ranked for in the past, you can also then do the work to improve the rankings in organic search as well. And again, we're going to show in a moment an example of a site that we did this with, such that we were able to improve their organic search traffic substantially while improving their Google grant at the same time. So this site, this was for work that we did for the American Research Center in Egypt. And we did the exact process that I just described to you for maximizing their Google grant. One of the things that we did was we found out that the American Research Center in Egypt had content that was so specific to the work that they were doing that they missed the forest for the trees, because they were able to tell you for a specific tomb in Egypt all of the information about the archaeology that was being performed there, all of the amazing findings, the specific technologies that were used to find out all the new information about how ancient Egyptians lived. But unfortunately, there were not enough people searching for those really granular, specific ideas. So what we were able to do for the American Research Center in Egypt is that we went and we did the process that I just talked you through, and we found keywords that their competitor sites ranked for, And the trend that we found was that those competing sites, they ranked for the more general ideas. The more general ideas like the Egyptian pharaohs, the names of the pharaohs, where they're buried, the names of the temples or the pyramids, the mythology of Egypt. All of these things have a lot of search volume. There's many people that are searching for this. And in that way, we were able to create content pages for the Google grant such that the Google grant could be maximized. And then what resulted, all of these numbers that are shown on this page, this is all increased traffic and increased number of keywords that they ranked for in organic search as a result of doing this. So you can see that their organic search traffic went from, maybe roughly 2,000 or 3,000 visits per month up to, more in the range of 20, 25,000 visits per month. So a huge, over 600% change from following that process of co-optimizing between the Google grant and their organic search efforts. Now, as I mentioned before, there have been some Google grant policy changes, and this happened about 2 years ago. And it's interesting because when this happened, there were a lot of nonprofits that were impacted substantially. And there were some nonprofits that were spending $10,000 a month prior to this that were never able to spend $10,000 a month afterwards. And it was very challenging for a lot of organizations. What's interesting about these changes is that pretty much every one of these changes is essentially Google urging you to do better in managing your Google grant. And as Mark said, that getting a free Google grant is kind of like getting a free puppy, and that there actually is maintenance and management that is required. And each of these policy changes actually pushes you to have a better experience for your users. So the first example is, that they require now that you maintain a 5% click-through rate. Now, all that means is that you have to make sure that you are showing your ads for relevant keywords that are really specific to what your audience is searching for. And when you do that, when they get to their landing page, they're having a good experience because the landing page and the advertisement really matches what they were searching for. The other thing that was a benefit about these changes is that they did away with for a long time, there was a $2 cap that you couldn't bid more than $2 cost per click for your Google grant keywords. So they did away with that. And the reason that they did away with that is now that they're expecting you to manage your grant more effectively. Another thing that they did is that they disallowed single word keywords. And then they have a specific list that we can share with anybody who's interested of single word keywords that are allowed. But in general, they're saying, look, you can't just target a single word keyword. And probably the classic example for this one was Women for Women International. Well, they did their Google grant, for a while they did their Google grant the easy way, and they just targeted the keyword women. And the thing is that while that brought in a lot of traffic, it didn't bring in relevant qualified traffic. And that's what some of these changes really push you towards, is making sure that the audience that you're getting in front of is as relevant and as qualified as possible. So when they took away the ability to target single word keywords, it actually, while it made it more challenging to manage Google grant, it actually made it such that you're targeting an even more effective audience. Now, geo-targeting is required. So now an organization, we talked about that earlier, that an organization that is just advertising to the Metro Denver area, for example, is expected to not have just all of their keywords be, national or international in scope. They also require that you have at least 2 active ad groups per campaign, and that each of those have 2 active text ads. And we're going to get into it in a moment about what this means you can do or need to do to split test those different calls to action such that you can use that to apply to your messaging and be as effective as possible in terms of the offer and the messaging in your advertisement. We also are required to have 2 site link ad extensions now. It gives us another opportunity to test our messaging. We can't target somebody else's brand names, and then the keywords must have a quality score of 2 or higher now. So quality score is a black box algorithm that Google uses to assess how relevant your ads and the experience is for the users that come in through your advertisements. And it's a 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being very good and 1 being very bad. And so essentially they're saying that you need to keep a fairly high quality score. And again, this is just another example of how what they're really doing is they're really just pushing you to provide the best experience to your audience as possible. Right, moving on from that, we're going to talk specifically about split testing the messaging in the Google Grant. So when you use the Google Grant, as I mentioned a moment ago, they require that you have at least 2 different ads for each ad group. So what that means is that you run these 2 ads against each other, and you have the ability to see, well, which of these works better. So in this case with the Red Cross, they have kind of a short form advertisement. Make a donation, sign up for a course. And when they click on the ad, it takes them to this page. Red Cross official site, help where it is needed most. Very pithy, very brief, concise advertisement. Then they have this more fully built out advertisement where it has a larger description. It's able to provide a little bit more in terms of trust factors, and the offer describes a little bit more about where your money's going to, etc. So without the Google Grant, you would have to pay to run advertising to test these 2 different ideas. And the way that it works is that you will generally run one of these against another until you see which one is the champion, which one performs the best. And then when you find out which one performs the best, then you remove the loser, and then you create a new ad to run against the champion. So that in that way, you're constantly improving your messaging, and you're constantly learning new things about what people respond to as far as your offer goes, as far as the uniqueness of your offer. One example, when we were, I was doing some work for a conservation-focused nonprofit that was focused around global warming, and the premium that we were able to offer was a green pin that you could fit on your suit or use that as a tie tack. And it turns out that this was actually something that Al Gore wore when he was talking about climate change. And so we were able to test whether or not, well, is that something that would people be more likely to make a donation if we were to offer them a small premium like that could help them, help that person to show, that where they're doing their work in terms of supporting the environment, supporting that cause. And it turned out that when we offered that premium, the conversion rate improved dramatically. And this was something we were able to prove using Google Grant, so that we didn't even have to pay to find out whether or not, which call to action worked best. So this is an example of, really being able to take that information from the Google Grant, learn for free what performs best, and then you can apply that to other areas of your marketing and advertising. So the other thing that is kind of a natural consequence of managing your Google Grant effectively is that you need to create strong landing pages so that when you do bring somebody in, they're likely to make a donation, or sign up for your email list, or otherwise take the action that you want them to take in support of your mission. So in this case, we have certainly a very strong landing page that has a very clear call to action front and center. There's no distracting navigation that might send people in other directions on your site. There's essentially an offer here describing what Doctors Without Borders does and why it's a valuable way to spend your time and attention and resources to support their cause. Affirms that it's tax deductible. There are trust factors such that you have the charity navigator that shows that they're highly ranked, and various other ways that this is both in terms of if you're going to choose an organization to donate to, this is a good choice, but also things that indicate that if you're about to put your credit card information in, that you are putting it into a safe place as well, which is certainly important in a landing page and anytime that anybody's going to share any kind of information like that. The other thing about this is that this page scrolls down and you add your personal information, but they get the most important things first, and they have the call to action at the top. And so these are just some examples of some of the elements of this landing page that are very, very effective. But another view of the landing page that I want to share with you that is important for the Google grant has to do with how fast the page loads. So we talked earlier about the algorithm that Google uses to assess how relevant and authoritative and the type of experience that your users are having with your advertising. One of the factors that goes into that is how fast your page loads. So in this example, we have AmeriCares has a very solid landing page here, and it has some of those same elements that we just talked about, certainly a good landing page. But we find that when we look at their page speed, it is actually it's very slow compared to the average for sites. And one thing that we know is that a slow loading landing page will dramatically reduce the conversion rate and reduce the amount of donations that you're able to bring in from this page. So whereas in contrast, we have the American Foundation for the Blind that's using every action for their form, and they have substantially better score in terms of the page speed. Now, this is also something that's very interesting in the context of a website redesign. One of the things that we love using Google Grant for is to collect as much data as we can to inform the website redesign. And that might be data associated with how people use the site, how people navigate through the site when they come in from different keywords, what their conversion rate is when they land on different landing pages. And in this case, another example is that using the Google Grant and maximizing the Google Grant, we turn our attention to improving page speed, and then we get this data that can then be applied and used as a benchmark for improving page speed the next time that you redesign your website, and also really push you to think about things like this as you're redesigning your site. Moving on to, this is one of the most interesting things that happens, and one of the most effective things that happens for organizations that come to us with a need for support and improving their Google Grant, is that we find that very often there are gaps in your web analytics tracking. And this is a pretty common, this is really a very common problem, whereas the data quality, it can be bad itself, and you can lack the ability to see what your conversion rate is in Google Analytics, which is what the screenshot is from, or in Google Ads. So in order to be able to really maximize and optimize your Google Grant, you need to not only be able to see the conversion rate and the amount of revenue that you bring in your Google Analytics profile, but it also needs to be collected to Google AdWords such that you're able to see the number of conversions and the value of each conversion that comes in from Google Ads. And then when you're able to do this, essentially when you're pushed to do this as a result of improving your Google grant, that data quality is now going to apply to all the decisions that your leadership is making. You're able to make better decisions because your data quality is better, and you're able to show a more accurate picture to leadership with regard to what is happening on your site. So now we're going to move into the real world example that we very recently did with an organization called Dogs for Better Lives. So Dogs for Better Lives it's a very, I think it's a very fun organization, and the thing that I like about it is that they find instances where there's a dog that was being trained to be a service dog. And, so you can picture the dog going to the academy, going to doggy college to learn how to be a service dog. But the thing is that there's some of those dogs that don't pass the final exam. Now, these are exceptional animals, and they're going to make a wonderful companion for somebody, but they're not allowed, because they didn't pass their final exam, they're not allowed to go on to be service dogs in that capacity. So what this organization does is it matches people that can really benefit from that type of pet. And Dogs for Better Lives came to us, and they had a lack of online visibility. They knew that there was a problem. They knew that part of the problem was that their Google grant was very badly underutilized. So with the Google grant, you get $10,000 per month of free advertising. When they got to us, they were using about $1,200 per month. And this was an organization that targeted a very specific geographic location. So they couldn't target keywords that were national in scope. So they had a special challenges there. And what we did is when we got into learning from them what was most important, they said that, we would like to be able to use our Google grant more effectively, but really, more than anything, we don't know what's happening on our website. We don't know if we have good data quality or bad. There's not an easy way for us to know what is going on our website in general. So as a result, the first thing we did was we did an audit of the account to find the opportunities and liabilities, and we were able to then confidently point to some clear-cut activities that would improve the amount of qualified traffic that was coming to their site. So this included traffic coming in from the Google grant by targeting keywords that they weren't targeting in the past and pushing them to create pages such that we had new good pages to target with the Google grant. And then another thing that we did for them is that we created a dashboard. And this dashboard showed them what was going on with their site, what were people, when somebody converted on their site and made a donation, or it showed interest in adopting a dog, where did that person come from? How did they get to the site? What did they do on the site before they took that action? And we were also able to really dramatically improve the relevance of the keywords that we were targeting in the Google grant. As a result, what we were able to do is we were able to increase the conversions, and we were able to increase the visibility. And we were able to create a dashboard for them such that they could see where these improvements happen, and they could see what types of campaigns were driving the most conversions, the highest dollar value in donations. And as a result of this effort, we really, really dramatically improved their click share, the number of people that clicked on their ads went up from 15% to 45%. The impression share, meaning just the number of people that saw their ads or the percentage of people that saw their ads in comparison to other sites that were targeting the same keywords, went up from 10% to 40%. And then the conversions in terms of people who donated or adopted a dog more than doubled from 8 per month up to 18 per month by the time that we were done optimizing this campaign. And then there was also a revenue increase of 30%. So really substantially positive improvements we were able to have with that campaign. And, all the while we were doing things that pushed them forward in terms of improving the quality of data that they had to look at, improving the content that they had on their site, matching it to what people were searching for, and improving other channels of marketing as well. So now I'm interested to know what questions you might have that could, help us to
we've
make
got some
this
good ones
as
here.
useful or as effective as possible.
Yeah, that was a lot of information, and that's why we have folks like Eric to help, and that's why we want to make sure we had this webinar as a jumping off point. So let me get into some of the questions here for you, Eric. How do you recommend keeping track of your different messages? Meaning your text ads that you are split testing.
Yeah, that is a great point. So what we will usually do is we will create a set of text ads, and we'll provide those to the client in a collaborative document, like maybe a Google Sheet or some sort of a collaborative worksheet. And what we're looking for there is when we provide that ad copy, what we're looking for is you please take a look at this ad copy and let us know if there's anything here that is is contrary to the way that your messaging typically, your messaging and your brand typically applies these ideas. And in that way, we might find that there's some organizations that say, okay, well, we never call it by that particular name. Our brand only calls it by this name, or our organization only calls it by this name, because it might introduce confusion. So in that way, we're able to elicit information from our clients about what's important for them to have in the messaging. And then once we have that, then we start adding that messaging into the Google Grant. And when we optimize the advertisements, the way that we do that is that we have to make sure that the ads can run for long enough that the results are statistically significant. And this is one of the things that's especially important about the Google Grant, is that you have $10,000 in free advertising, and it takes a lot of advertising to get to a statistically significant result. So I think that that's very important. A very important way to think about this is that whereas we might, maybe it takes that much money just to get to a statistically significant result in 1 month for these two ads that we're testing against each other. If we didn't have the Google Grant, then we really wouldn't have, maybe we wouldn't have a way to do that, other than, finding resources and spending our own money to do that type of advertising. So the way that we keep track of that then is that we take we continue to run the winners in the Google ads, and then any notes that come up around, the user behavior around particular messaging get added back into that collaborative worksheet, such that we're able to keep track of, what worked and what didn't. And sometimes it relates to premiums, as I mentioned before, or something that you can offer to the audience, something that can be useful for them. And in other cases, it really applies more so to just the wording that you use. So it can be the offer, what you're actually offering them, or it can just be the way that you describe it. And we keep track of all that using collaborative documents.
Awesome. That's great. And then, do you recommend that the landing pages be part of the main site and site navigation, or are they more standalone, or does that really matter?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things to think about there. Is that um, for this type of advertising, we usually want to bring somebody to a page that that kind of minimizes the other types of activities that they might want to do. So um, and there's two ways to approach this. I mean, there will be some situations where we like the idea for people to come to the site and view a lot of informational content about all the different things that we're doing, all the different things that are part of our mission. And then there's other situations where we really want people to take a single action. And what's great about the Google grant is that, well, when you're paying, if you're paying $10,000 a month, you can really only afford to send somebody to a landing page where they have to make a donation, or they have to sign up for your email list, or they have to take an action. And you can't afford to spend the money to send them to an informational page as easily, because the return on investment won't back out for that type of tactic. Now, with the Google grant, what you're actually able to do is you can more easily send them to an informational page because it's in-kind advertising. So you're not actually paying for that advertising, such that your return on investment is going to be positive, whether you send them to an informational page or whether you send them to a really conversion-focused page where you're trying to get a donation or you're trying to get them to sign up or take a particular action.
Great stuff. Hey, we have a couple more questions, but while we're answering these questions, if you can click through to the last slide with our contact information and keep that up while we're answering those questions, that would be terrific. Thank you. Now, let's see, the next question was, how much time each day would you estimate, someone should devote to managing Google Ads? Ooh, that's a loaded question. But I'd love to hear the answer to that.
Yeah, it depends. And, part of it depends on how much, it kind of also includes how much of the Google grant you're able to utilize. Because what we find is that an organization that's able to um, utilize the full $10,000, well, there's a lot more value that's coming in from that Google grant in comparison to an organization that's only able to use maybe $2,000 or $3,000 of their Google grant. So we can talk a bit about like what's the ideal amount of time to spend. So ideally, I think that there's, if you're able to really utilize your Google grant effectively, I look at it as like five or six, maybe spend 5 or 6 hours per week in the Google grant, and I'd break that up probably into two or three sessions per week of logging in and making adjustments and doing the typical maintenance activities. Now, there are some instances where the Google grant's not able to be fully utilized, and there's a really specific reason why, like we talked about earlier. Like if you're targeting a very specific geography, it may be that you're never going to spend more than $2,500 of your Google grant each month. And that might just be, it might just be a constraint that you're not able to move beyond. And if that's the case, then there are ways that you can set up a specific set of keywords and have kind of a specific set of activities that don't require a lot of heavy lifting, but will maintain that presence for you so that you're at least able to spend the $2,500 a month and do that effectively, in which case you could spend less than 6 hours a week, and maybe it would be okay to spend 4 hours a week on the Google grant, or less time optimizing it, because it's a smaller audience and you're able to optimize effectively for that smaller audience. Yeah, thank you for that. Good question.
Hey, Eric, just a side note there. I think we can see a split screen there, your desktop as well as the
Oh, okay.
there you go. Now we're good. Just went back and forth
you.
there. Cool. Let's see. Yeah, just a couple of other housekeeping things. We will be recording this session, so you can view it afterwards. We'll send out the link. You'll be able to find it on our resources page as well. So if you go to that, it'll be available for viewing after the fact. Let's see. Another question was, if your SEO or website isn't great, will that affect your ability to use the Google grant?
Yes, great question. Yeah, so there are a variety of ways that having a poorly optimized website can reduce your likelihood of being able to really take advantage of the Google grant. And a lot of these crop up when we're in the context of a website redesign. So if you have a website redesign plan, I've heard people that are in leadership at organizations say, okay, well, we want to get a Google grant, but our website isn't very good yet. But we're going to be redesigning the website in a few months, so we're going to wait until after the website redesign to get the Google grant. And all that logic makes sense, but I have a contrary view to that. And my contrarian opinion is that go ahead and get the Google grant running now. Do all the work that you need to do to figure out what the audience you're targeting will be, and then start collecting data from the Google grant about how people are interacting with your site. And then you can use that data and apply it to your how you redesign your website. And then there will be things that you'll find, like we talked about, certainly page speed can have a negative impact on your Google grant if it takes a long time for your site to load. Another example would be if your content, you could have content on your site that doesn't really match what your audience is searching for, and this can result in having kind of a poor organic search experience, but then it also really significantly hinders you for your Google grant. Yeah, so that's a great example as well. Yeah, and certainly, and if you're one of the people that are asking one of these good questions, just share your email as well if you'd like us to consider choosing you for the content strategy that we're going to be able to do for one of the kind listeners who is asking questions. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, we had everybody's contact information for the attendees, and we'll be able to report off of that and select. So, yeah, thanks for all the great questions. I think we have time for one more, and then we can definitely follow up with anybody else we didn't get to, and our apologies for in the sake of time. But another question was, if you had your Google Ad grant account suspended or canceled due to the changes, you weren't able to keep up with the click-through rates or whatever it might be, do you have any kind of specific next steps or best steps to get that requalified or started up again? Any recommendations there?
Yeah, everyone is unique. There are now really quite a few requirements for the Google grant now, such that there are a lot of different possibilities of what could be wrong with it, such that cause the grant to be suspended. So those really need to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And I think that what's important there is to figure out what is out of policy, and then devise whatever systems necessary and whatever standards of procedure are necessary so that it doesn't get penalized again, or it doesn't get paused again, I think is the approach there. But unfortunately, there's not necessarily an easy way to address that when an account does get suspended. It's usually a process of going through and finding, checking it against all the different criteria.
Yeah, definitely an issue, and why we're here to help. So just kind of as a summary, Eric, thank you so much for all that. A lot of information. It can be chewy, right? There's a lot of details. But with someone like Eric at the wheel to help, we can definitely help with your Google ad grants. And again, just a little bit more about Cathexis Partners. Anything, these are all so interrelated, right? Your website, your load time, SEO, your Google grants. We can help with all of that, including your CRM system and fundraising strategies. So never hesitate to reach out. There's a couple of questions we didn't have time for, but we'll definitely follow up via email. But thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you so much, Eric, for your expertise. Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. All right, have a great day.